Hello, everyone. Should we start?
I think we should wait for a couple of minutes. Let people join.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody.
Hello.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yes, you're audible.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon for those who we are in India. So the recording has started. So I'm going to introduce the next session of this second day. It's the second session of the second day of this European funded project, Education for technological literacy and inclusion. I have some problems with my voice. So the person in charge is going to be Bakshi Sachar, and I think he's going to take us through Python coding through Google Colab, no? And trying to do it something as he has said before, some exercises, some practical. I hope people have come with a computer so we can all benefit from the practicality of not only learning theoretically, also trying to do what we are trying to learn. Okay, so Bakshi, it's up to you. The floor is yours. Yes, go to it, and then you are going to have another session that is common, no? That both
Yes.
of
Yes. Thank you for handing it over to me. I think Gerson would also be taking this session. I'll be supporting Gerson in the process. So I'll just share a few the main link for Google Colab on the chat, and then I'll hand it over to you, Gerson, to take it forward from here. Yes. So yes. So I've shared the link of Google Colab in the chat. So this is basically a form of a place like earlier we were using Thorny, and Gerson had beautifully explained about how Thorny works and different concepts that we did, like for example list for example, numbers and calculations that we did earlier. So in this session, so basically Google Colab is an online tool where we can directly write our code and it can do the code for us directly. So I've shared the link. Gerson, would you like to share the screen and then show everybody?
Yeah. So little change of plans here, but it's so basically we are going to be kind of finishing up the Python, the explanations and all that, and then Bakshish will take over. Maybe at the end of this session or maybe the next session, and he'll be walking through a real data set and going through the entire process. But before that, there are still some more concepts that I should explain. So I'm going to be doing that now, and so to continue from where Bakshish left off with just now, we have Google Colab, which is here, and then we have Trinket, right? So there is so Python has, I spoke about the Python interpreter a few times now, right? So interpreter is like a translator. So think of, imagine like you are trying to communicate with someone else who doesn't speak the same languages that you do, and then you have like a translator who translates the message, right? So it's going through you. And that's essentially what's happening whenever we do any kind of programming, Python or anything else, right? So the machine's computer speaks in zeros and ones, right? And obviously we don't speak in zeros and ones. And so we need some kind of interpreter that translates from something that we can communicate in, which is Python in this case, into a machine language, right? And there are interpreters and compilers, and you don't have to get into the details of that, but that's what I mean when I talk about interpreter. Now, in Python, there are two modes that we can work in, right? One is called a script mode, which is what we've been doing all this time, right? Connie uses that, and Trinket also uses that, and this is what the script mode is, right? So one of the things about the script mode is the lines are run from top to bottom. Right? We start at the top, and then the interpreter reads all of the lines one at a time until it reaches the end, and then when it reaches the end, it's done, right? When the program is complete, it's done. The interactive mode, so the other mode is called interactive mode, and Google Colab uses that interactive mode. Okay, so you just go to colab.research.google.com, click on the link. I think that's the link Bakshi shared.
Yes.
Yes. So you click on that link to take you to this. If you've not already signed in to your Google account, do that. You need to sign in through your Google account. It's free, and then you have the option of clicking on new notebook. So they call it notebooks. These are called notebooks. This interactive mode is called a notebook. And if you click on that, you're taken to the new notebook, and this is what it looks like. The file, so these files are saved on your Google Drive, and you can go and navigate it and work with it and so on. Right? Now, the very first thing I want you to do is to disable this AI. Right? Now, why should we do that? AI is amazing and beautiful from the perspective of programming, but if you're learning the language, then AI kind of comes in the way, right? Because it kind of predicts and does work for you, and then you don't really get to practice, right? It's like a spoiler, right? It spoils what you're trying to do. Now, if you're actually programming professionally, then that's a good thing, right? Because you want to save time, you want to output a lot of code, and then AI makes sense in that case. Right, so the first thing we're going to do is disable AI. So you go to Tools, Settings, and then AI Assistance, and then hide the generative AI features. Okay, and so we're going to work without AI for this course. And once you get really familiar and good at Python, then you can start exploring some of the things you can do with AI, right, from the coding perspective. The other thing is it's a good idea to rename the file. So I'm going to say day2 session 2, you can call it whatever you like. And let me just introduce you to this interface because it's slightly different from Thinkit. It's not as intuitive. You don't see a, well, you see a play button here, but you also see other things, right? So what's all of this? So I'm going to take you through a quick tour of the things that matter. So with Google Colab, the important concept is called a cell, right? So this rectangle here is a cell, and you have cells one below the other, right? Not left and right, but just one below the other. And there are two types of cells. There are code cells and there are text cells. Okay. So this right now here is a code cell, and you know it's a code cell because it has a play button. Okay. I'm going to click on the add text cell, and if you click on that, it adds another cell to the bottom. You know this is a text cell because it has all of these. It's like, you know, like Microsoft Word. It has all of this bold and italics and all this formatting and all of that. And this is pretty much like a text kind of a thing, right? A text editor. It's text editor. And then when you're in any of these cells, right, it says double click to enter to edit. You have these different tools over here, and one of them is you can move up and down. You can rearrange the code and the text cells, right? So I'm going to move the text cell up here, and I'm just going to say, I'm going to call it intermediate Python. And if you're wondering what this hash is, this is not a comment. This is not Python. Remember that, right? So this is a title. You can have heading 1, right? Remember Microsoft Word, Google Docs has this. Heading 2, heading 3, and no heading. Okay. And then when you're done with editing that, you can get out of it, and then it gets replaced with the actual text. Okay, so now why do we need these text cells, right? The main reason is when you're explaining different concepts. So when with machine learning and data science and all that, it can be a complex topic. And if I want to show you, for example, or show someone else, there is involved a lot of instructions and descriptions and explanations and all of that. And so it's a good idea to have these text cells so you can have all those explanations. Right? It's kind of like the comments that we mentioned, except you can have formatting. You can make it bold and italic and make it look nice. You can even put images and links and all of that. Right? So that's the reason for that. But let's not worry too much about that. We'll mostly be working with these code cells. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is to remember is that you can have multiple code cells, right? So if I hover over this, I can either add a code cell from there. I can add a code cell from here, and there are some keyboard shortcuts as well, right? So and in this, I can write Python code. So I'm going to write something that we all know already. Okay, print hello, and I can put another line, print bye. Okay, and if I run this, click on that, something very interesting happens. The very first time you run it, it takes a little while, and then once it spins up or it starts up, then it's going to be a lot easier, right? So you can see it prints out hello and bye. But here's an interesting thing, right? This output here, this console, what was normally a console, is kind of tied to the cell. So this whole thing, you can see the border here. This whole thing is considered one cell, right? The output and the input is both on the same cell, right? And if I type another one here, so if I say, for example, name equals Tom, for example, print name, right? If I do that and print that here, now the output for this shows up in this cell. So I've got one cell over here, and I've got another cell over here, okay? Now, the other interesting thing to note is, I'm going to click over here. You can see a number here on the side, right? If I'm on the cell, it goes away. But if I hover outside, it's hard for me to point. But look at this area over here. There's the number 1, and here's the number 2. Okay, and now I'm going to run the first cell again and see what happens to the number. Okay, now that becomes 3. Okay, so remember I said in Trinket, the Python interpreter starts from the top, and then it starts reading line by line. It goes through the entire script. Remember, this is script mode, and then when it goes to the bottom, it's done. Okay, it's run the entire code. in Google Colab, there's no order, right? I can go, I can run this cell, then I can run this cell, and then I can run this cell again, and then and I can run it in whatever order. So one of the things it needs to say, to provide is this numbering system here. So I've got 2 and 3, and what this 2 and 3 mean is that this top cell here was run after this cell here, right? And the way you know that is, I'll show you how it is. So I have name equals Tom, and then I have print name. And then I'm going to add another cell down here. And then I'm going to say name equals Maria. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'll add another quote cell in between. Okay. So I've got name is equal to Tom. Then I've got print name. And then I've got name equals Maria. Okay. Now watch what happens if I put name is equal to Tom. Okay. And then print name, if I run that, now I get Tom. And then if I run name is equal to Maria, okay, and then I run this previous one again, watch what happens. It says Maria, you see that? And if you see the numbering, we've got 3, 4, 7, 6. It's all mixed up, right? But you can tell by the numbering, like the one that says 3, that was the cell that was run the earliest, right? And then 4, and then 6, and then 7. So you kind of know the order in which it's run. I'm not one of the things I don't like about Jupyter notebooks and this notebook way of doing things is it can get very messy, right? If you're working with something really complex, it can get really messy. So it's very important to keep things organized at all times, right? That being said, there are lots of benefits of that, and you're going to see some of the benefits right now. Right? So one of the things is you can actually make this a shortcut, right? So with the script mode, you need to say print and then name, right? With the interactive mode, you don't have to use the print all the time. You can use print and it works fine, but you can also just say name, and if it runs that, it gives me it evaluates and gives me the result. So I can see that result without having to do print, without having to print anything there, right? And the same thing goes for if I do any math calculation, like I can put whatever math calculation I want and click run. I don't need a print function. I don't need to call the print function, and it just works, right? So that's another benefit. And the real power is not so much with simple expressions like math and strings and all that. The real benefit is when you have something more complex like plots and charts and data grids and all of that, right? Which we're going to deal with later today. And that's where that's the power of it. That's the power of these notebooks. Very, very powerful. Images, you can display images and things like that. So lots of sound is another thing. Lots of more advanced type of data, right? Not just simple strings and numbers and things like that. Okay, so now I am going to delete these. Actually, no, I'll leave this over here just to show that you can you don't need to have the print function. Okay. So the next thing is, in fact, I can even add like a heading here, and I'm going to say like no need for print. Okay. And then I'll put another text over here, and this one I'm going to say so function chaining. Okay, and I'll explain what that means. Okay, function chaining. So we've kind of touched a little bit about this, but not so much. So what I'm doing now is, let me just explain what I'm doing. The first thing is, of course, introducing Jupyter Colab, right? What I'm going to do is, I'm now going to explain some random bits and pieces of Python. I don't want to teach extra, otherwise it's going to take too long. But only whatever's required in order to pick up a data set and see some visualizations with it. Okay, and I'll tell you what that means later on, but that's basically the climax, right? That's where we're all heading. We need to know some basics before we get to that stage. Okay, so there are some So before we actually get to working with a data set, there are some still odds and ends, some basic concepts here and there that you need to know. Okay, so one of them is called function chaining. Okay, so remember we had type of name, right? And now remember, see, we are in interactive mode, so I don't have to put a print over there. I don't even have to save it to a variable. I could do that, but I don't have to. I can just put type of name and it tells me that it's a string. Okay, and you can see that it doesn't even say class of string, it just says string. Okay. So remember we did this, and the pattern here is you have the function name, right? There's also len of name, right? So these are two functions, and they follow the similar format, right? They have the function name, then they have parentheses or brackets, and then they have the actual variable that goes in there, right? And then remember we have the other type, which is name dot upper. Remember that? So if you just see name, if I print name again, I'm getting Tom here, right? If I put name dot upper, right? So now I get all caps, and you can see the difference between these two, right? There's a difference between them. And the question is, and I didn't ask this question before, but now is the right time to ask it, right? Why? Why are there two different ways of calling functions, right? And the answer to that is sometimes it makes sense for something called function chaining, right? So you might want to call multiple functions at a time. So, for example, let me update name to be now, let's say Jane, but I'm going to put all lowercase, and I'm going to put like lots of spaces in the beginning and lots of spaces at the end. Okay. So I've got, and I didn't want that. Okay. So now I've changed name to say that, and if I now type in length of name, if I run that, right, we get 13. So there are 13 characters here. I can get name.upper, which is now Jane, but it has lots of space in the beginning and lots of space at the end, right? So let's say I want to trim that. I want to strip out all of that white space in the beginning and at the end, right? So I could do that if I put another one here and I say name.strip. Strip is another dot function. Both of these are dot functions. These are not dot functions, right? And it works similar to dot upper, where you provide the variable that you want to send to the function. You put a dot, and then you put the function, and then you open and close parentheses. Right? So this one here strips. It takes name, which is space, which is Jane, space, right? And it strips out all of the empty white space before and after Jane, right? Now, wouldn't it be nice if we could run both of these in one line instead of having two lines, right? Name.upper and then name.strip, right? And that's where the dot function makes sense, right? So instead of doing all of that, you can just go name.upper.strip, right? And you can keep chaining them, dot this, dot that, dot, and you can keep going on and on, right? So it saves a lot of time. So if I run that now, you can see that it performs both these actions at the same time, right? It converts it to uppercase and then it strips it, right? And so now you get just Jane all uppercase, and you get the quotes just around it without the extra space in the beginning and end. Okay, so that is called function chaining. Okay, the next concept I want to explain is print function print function with commas. Okay, not the best name for it, but you'll see what I mean, right? So we've seen that we can print out. We've seen this already. Name and then name, right? So we've seen this. Okay, name, and then we have Jane. And if you want to use the fancy thing here, we can always put that over there, or we can put that into a variable called cleaned name or something like that. Okay, run that, and then now we can just call we can just call cleaned name, and now we get the cleaned up name, right? Okay, so we've seen this, and nothing new here. But I can also do print. So watch what I'm doing now. I've got name, then I've got a comma, and then I've got cleaned name. Okay, you saw that? So name, okay, then comma, and then cleaned name. And if I run that, watch what happens, right? It prints out the first value here. Then if you put a comma, then it adds a space, and then it adds whatever you put next, right? And you can put lots of things, right? So let's say I want exclamation, I can put how you, right? Put a question mark. No, I don't want a question mark. Put a question mark there, right? So I can keep adding all of these one after the other, and it will just chain them all together. And the only thing is it adds a space. So maybe you don't want a space here, but it adds a space between each of these things, right? So that's the only thing to keep in mind. Now, why do we need this? Just because in notebooks, you're going to see this used quite a lot. F strings are really good, but F strings are more for formatting strings and presenting it and making it look good and all that. You can actually use F strings here itself. You can use a combination of both. Okay, okay, moving on. And I know these are there's no pattern here and all that, and the reason why is because I'm just covering bits and pieces that are kind of required in order to go to the next stage, which is the data visualization, right? And so this one is called modules. Okay, let me explain what's happening, right? The interpreter. Okay, so think of when I say interpreter, think of it as like a translator in real life, right? You're let's say you're going on a business trip, or I don't know, some meeting or something like that, and there's someone else that speaks a language that you don't speak, and there's the two of you don't have any language, the two of you don't know any language in common, right? And for the sake of argument, let's say we don't have Google Translate or any of the modern features we have right now, right? So you have an old-fashioned, and this is how we should do it all the time, right? Especially prime ministers and presidents going from country to country, they would have a translator. Sometimes they would call it interpreter as well, right? So the translator is responsible for translating, and the translator knows both the languages basically, right? So same thing with the interpreter. Now think about this, right? The interpreter needs to have a really good knowledge and vocabulary of the language, right? And now let's go back to the computer version of that and think about it. Think about like all of this knowledge is kind of like in memory, right? It's in their short-term memory, so they can interpret things really quickly, right? But what if uh, but what if you wanted to use something very specific, right? You're writing Python and you're doing something that's very niche, right? You're doing something that most people don't deal with, right? Um, if the interpreter right now is going to say, I don't know what you're talking about, right? And a simple example of this is random, right? So there's something called random. Let's say I want to generate a random number from 1 to 10, right? So there is something called random. But if I try and, so this is how I do it, right? So it has like one of these dot functions, rand int, so random integer from 1 to 10, okay? And if I try and run that, it's going to throw an error, right? It's going to say name random is not defined, right? Even though it's actually Python, it comes with Python, right? And the reason why is because this interpreter only has the bare minimum knowledge loaded into its memory, right? So its memory is very expensive. The more things it loads into its memory, the slower it gets, right? So it only loads the essentials. So all of the things we've learned so far, like type and print and import and dot upper, dot strip, all of this stuff, right? These are the most common things, like while loop and if, elif, else, all of these things. So these are the things it's in the short-term memory of the interpreter, and it can understand that right away. But when you talk about some more complex types of things, right? These are more like niche. You don't the interpreter doesn't have to do these. Think of it as with a real translator. Translator, it's a very technical conversation, and the translator's like, okay, I need to refer to a dictionary or something like that, right? So think of it that way, right? So it's a library. These are what are called libraries, and Python comes up with a lot of libraries, and you can access these libraries to do more advanced things. Okay, and you can create your own libraries, which we're going to learn through that. We're just going to use some libraries that are made available to us, right? So before you actually use the library, so this library here is called random. That's the name of the library, and the correct term for it is modules, right? So this is a module. So before you do that, you have to import the module. So think of it as like a translator, is translating from your language to another language, and you're talking about medical terminology, for example, and the translator is like, yeah, I don't have a medical degree, so I don't know medical terms. So they get like a special medical dictionary with special medical terms from both the languages. And then if you're using a medical term, then they have to refer to that dictionary. Right? So the first thing is they have to say, oh, hold on, let me go to my cupboard, my bookshelf, and let me pick up the medical dictionary. And let's say we're going out, we're meeting for a business lunch or something like that. The translator will bring the dictionary with them, right? So think of it that way, right? It's we're picking up a book from a bookshelf, and the Python term for that is import. Okay, so we're importing a module that is not there, that the main interpreter doesn't know and needs this external library, right? So this is called random, and it removed it from that. So when we import random, now it's almost like there are superpowers, right? So now the interpreter has all of the knowledge that it normally had, plus it has all of the knowledge of random, whatever random has, right? And one of the things random can do is this rand int, okay? And if I run that, it'll give me 5. And if I run it again, it'll give me another random number, 6, and another 9. And I can put a much bigger number here, and it'll give me a random number from this number to that number, right? So that is what modules are, and there are a few modules here. I'll show you another module, which is date and time, right? So let's say I want to know what the current time is. What's the current time, right? How do you do that? So that is something where the interpreter by itself doesn't have that superpower, doesn't have that knowledge. It has to refer. Let's say this time it's not a book. Let's say it's a watch, right? So to pick up the watch, and the watch tells, or the calendar, or the whatever, tells the translator or the interpreter what the current time is, right? So there's something called date time, right? And then within that, there's a function called now. Okay, date time dot now. If I run that, it's going to throw an error saying, I don't know what date time is, right? Because it's not been trained on date time, right? So before we do that, we have to import date time, right? And then now date time is bigger than random, right? Think of this as just like a small bookshelf. It's only random. But date time has a lot more things. Like it has information about time zones. It has information about lots of things as well. So it's almost like it's a library, and within date time there are lots of sections. It has to group it even further, right? Because importing the entire date time is really big, so we have to separate it into further categories. And so this category, because now is a very basic thing, it's just called date time. So it's literally going to call datetime.now, okay? And that will tell you what the current time is, right? And this is the format it uses: the year, month, day, hour. Now you must be wondering, it's 4 p.m. here in India. This thing is saying 10, right? 34, 35, and so on. So this is, I believe it's UTC time. So European time. So if you're in London or Portugal or anyone from that time zone, it will actually be your local time. And you won't even see the difference. It'll actually be whatever time it is right now. In other words, it's 10:34 in London and Portugal and whatever other countries are in the Greenwich Mean Time. Yep. Cool. So these are the two most popular ones, and we're going to, once we move on, we're going to cover two more libraries that are going to be used for working with data and visualizations and all of that. Okay. Cool. The next topic is functions. Okay, random topic. Okay, so I think it was about. Okay, so we have seen some functions already, right? We've seen type of name, for example, right? We've seen that. We've seen len of name, right? We've seen the dot upper, dot lower. We've even seen that dot now, dot randint, right? So lots of functions, right? Now, one of the things all of these have in common is that we haven't written them, right? The people at Python have written these functions, right? And all we're doing is we're calling it what is called we're calling the function. If you're saying like, okay, I want you to do some work for me. In this case, you're asking it a question. What is the type of the name? Whatever I give you, right? Name. In this case, it's like, tell me you're asking it a question. I want to know the length of name, right? So you're calling it. Someone else has done it. But you can actually create your own functions, right? You can make your own function and you can make it do whatever you like, right? So let's say, for example, I have a function called greet, right? So we've got name already, and I say hello and the name of the person. Okay, and if I run that, it's going to say forget what the name is, Jake. Okay, and we want to at this point, I think let's clean it up. Let's go with name. So see what I did there. I went up to the top and I ran this the very first thing again. So now if I run that, now it's going to say hello Tom. That's the beauty of I don't have to keep typing over and over. Okay. So I've got hello Tom there. And let's say I want to convert this into a function, right? And we're going to see over time the importance of putting it in the function, right? So what I can do is I can train Python and say, I'm going to teach you a new task. I'm going to teach you how to greet people. Like it's like manners. Let's say you're teaching Python manners, right? Teaching a Python good etiquette. And I say teaching, I'm going to say, I'm going to teach you how to greet people. Okay. So how you do that is you're defining what is called a function. A function is like a task. You define your function and the name, and you have to give that function a name, right? So call the function greet. Okay. And then, of course, when you greet someone, you need to know the name of the person. Right? If I tell you, can you greet? You say, okay, greet who? You greet me, greet someone else. And if it's someone else, you need to know who that person is, right? What's the person's name? So we have this name thing here. Then we have this colon, right? So again, remember colon, we've done it before. Colon is telling the interpreter that we are starting a new block, right? So if you put enter now, it has an indent, right? It adds some space at the beginning, right? And then here, now we can have the function, right? So we're saying print hello name, okay? And if I run that, it doesn't do anything because Python is saying like, okay, done. So now basically we've trained Python, we've told Python that, I'm going to teach you a new task. It's called greet. And I'm going to give you a name, any name, and you're going to greet that person. Okay. So now this is the function definition. And now we are calling the function. So now it's going to be similar to type of name and len of name and all of that. But now we can make our own, right? So we can say greet of name, right? So see that type name, len name, greet name looks the same, right? Except this one, we created it ourselves, right? These were not created by us. These were created by the people who made Python, right? So if I run that now, it's basically saying hello Tom. It does exactly what you teach it to do, right? So we've created our own function here, okay? Now, one of the things to remember is there are a few different types of functions, right? But a basic function has something called input, something that goes into the function, which is name in this case, right? It's coming into the function. Then there is some kind of processing, some thinking, calculation, evaluation of expressions, things like that. Okay. And then sometimes, not always, there's some information that comes out of the function. Okay. So let's look at an example of something that comes out, right? So now we're going to teach Python a new function, right? I'm going to teach, I'm going to teach you a new trick, basically. So we're going to define a function, and we're going to say, we're going to call it add numbers. Okay, so it uses the same rules as variables. And we're going to say, so now it's saying, if I had to tell you, can you add these two numbers? You're going to respond to me and say, which numbers do you want me to add? You got to give me the numbers, right? So in the same way, we have to give it two numbers here. So maybe it's num1 and num2. You can call it whatever we like, right? N1, N2, number one, number two. Doesn't even have to be English, right? You can use other languages. Okay, and colon again, right? So colon, we're defining a function, we're teaching Python new trick basically. And now we have adding number is basically just num1 plus num2, right? But now we have to what is called return the function, right? So remember I used the word the throwing back. So this len function, it throws back a result, and you have to catch it and save it to a variable. In Trinket, you have to save it to a variable. In Jupyter, in Google Colab, by the way, this is called Jupyter now. In Google Colab, if you don't catch it and do anything with it, it just shows the value, the result down. Right? But if you want to do something with it, you have to catch it and store it into a variable. So in order to do that from the function, when you're defining the function, you have to use a keyword called return. Okay, so you're returning function, you're returning the value back. Okay? So you're saying, so what is this? What this is saying is, what you're telling Python here, or telling the interpreter is, I'm going to teach you a new trick. I'm going to teach you how to add numbers. Okay, so I'm going to give you a number and save that into a variable called num1. Remember that, save it as num1. And I'm going to give you another number and remember that as num2, right? And then you're saying you calculate num1, whatever you saved in num1, plus whatever you saved in num2, add that up, and then return that back. Give me that, return it back to me, the result of it. Okay. So if I run that, okay, if it says, if you have a check mark here, that's basically the interpreter saying, done, learned it. It's a very good learner. It learns these tricks and all that really, really well. Okay. So now that it's learned it, now you can call the function the same way you've called name and type and whatever, except now we're calling it add numbers. And we cannot give it name because it's expecting numbers, right? So it even tells you there, I'm expecting num1 now, and then num2. So now you can give it, and see, I put a space there just because it looks nice, but I don't need a space there. Okay? And it gives me 10, right? So it's returning back the sum of the two numbers, okay? And I'm not catching it, right? But the good thing about Jupyter is, or Google Colab is, that if you don't catch it and save it, it puts it out into the console, right? It shows the output of it. But the better thing to do is to catch it and save it, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing. And we put some other numbers here. And this time we're going to catch the result, whatever is returned, we're going to catch it, and we're going to store it into a variable called result. Right? And this is similar to what we've seen in Trinket. Okay, so we've done that. Okay, so it's processing done. Now we have a variable called result. So if I type in result, remember this is a notebook, so I don't have to put print. I put the print, and you can see that it's printing out the result. Okay, it's added these two numbers. Okay, so that is the so that's a function. Right? Okay, then next concept. By the way, any questions so far? No questions? Okay.
No questions for the moment.
Okay. moving on. So again, these are, you can see that this is slightly different from the previous class. I'm randomly teaching various things, and these are all things that are required for the next step, which is data cleanup and visualization. Okay, so cool. So named versus positional, right? So when we said let's do another one, right? So let's say we create another function, define a new function called display info. Okay, and we want the name of the person, and we want the age of that person, and we're going to print out, right? We're going to print out actually, so, and here's I'm going to make use of now another thing we learned over there, which is the commas, right? We're going to have name, age, okay? So I've thought it now a new trick. You give it a name, you give it an age, and it says name is name and age is age, right? And if I run that now, I'm calling it and I'm sending it, it needs to know a name. So it's asking me for a name. So I'm going to put John, and then it's asking me for an age. So I put 10, let's say, right? And if I run that, now it's going to print out name is John and age is 10, right? Works fine. Maybe I'll put a comma over here just to make it look really nice. Okay, so I've got name is John and age is 10. Good. What if I change the order, right? I put 10 and then I put John, right? Now it's going to be a little weird because now it's saying name is 10 and age is John. Okay. Now, for a small function like this, why would I ever do 10 and John? It doesn't make sense. But when you deal with some complex functions that have 20, 30, 40 different parameters, sometimes, you know, there's something called optional and required, right? So sometimes you might say like, well, if you give me some information, I'll use it. But if you don't give me the information, then that's fine. Right? So when you're filling forms, sometimes you see mandatory or required, and sometimes you see optional, right? So so then if you have lots and lots and lots of parameters, these are called parameters, right? So this thing here, each of this is called a parameter. Okay? Or argument. Sometimes they call it arguments. Positional parameters. I should have explained these actually. Okay, so parameter. These are two parameters. These are two parameters. What is it? This is one parameter, right? These are two parameters, right? So I can actually swap them, and if I wanted to display it correctly, I can actually mention the. So it's saying name, right? But it's like no, I want to give you the age. So I can give you the age here, right? Let's say 15, and name equals. So now I've swapped the two, right? I've changed it, and so this one is Anna, let's say. Right? And you can see that it's printing it correctly, even though I've changed the position. Right? So if you change the position, you have to mention the name equals and so. Okay. So so with that, it concludes. You know, I mean, there are so many other things, but these are just made a list of things that you need to know before getting to the next session. Okay. So the next session now is about the data set, right? So we've got, I think it's, how long do I have till 5, is it? Anyway, just let me know how much time I have relative to now. Okay, so the next thing to know is this concept of tabular data, right? And soon I'll create a new notebook, but I'll just quickly just mention the concept of tabular data, right? And we've all seen this tabular data in some form or the other, right? So two-dimensional, so one-dimensional data is basically, we've seen this, right? We've seen names equals, we've seen lists earlier today, right? So Tom and Maria, for example, right? You have a list of names, one after the other, right? This is one-dimensional, right? So it only has one dimension, okay? But maybe you could also have two-dimensional things, right? Let's say we have now name and age, right? So you could have so you have names and then you have ages, right? Which is, 10 and 6, 45, whatever, right? So you have names and ages, and each of these are individually one-dimensional data, right? But very often we need to deal with two-dimensional data, right? And the best example of that is spreadsheets, okay? Spreadsheets. So if you look at um, spreadsheet example, right? So I just searched for a random image. Can you
Someone needs to be
mute
muted.
after,
Dora, sorry, Isidora needs to be muted.
so you can see lots of examples of spreadsheets here, and trying to here you go, right? So this is an example here of a two-dimensional database, right? So it's got a length and a breadth, right? Length and breadth. So this one, for example, tells me the names of people, quizzes, home participation, final project, and so on, right? So there are two-dimensional, and these types of spreadsheets are very useful, very powerful, and Python can work really, really well with them. Okay, so we're going to learn how to work with spreadsheets, how to work with data. And one of the ways in which this type of data is stored is, there are many examples, is Excel. This is using, I think it's using Microsoft Excel. There's also Google Sheets. A lot of us use Google Sheets now. If you're on a Mac, Numbers is another tool. Okay? And then
Excuse me. Excuse me, dear Frankie.
I
Isidora needs to mute. Isidora?
think Ben, I think you can mute her if you're in admin.
I'm not managing to mute her.
Tú me tendrías que avisar cuando ya no me quieres ver.
Isidora?
Sigo esperándote. Qué mal por
Isidora needs to mute.
tú hoy no quieras salir. Pero tranqui.
Isidora, please. Can you please mute yourself?
I'll just turn my volume down. Okay, so so there are these spreadsheets, right? And one popular format is what is called a CSV file. Okay, so I'm going to show you now. I'm going to open another notebook, new notebook in Drive. And, I'm going to call this Day-2 session 3. And by the way, are we taking a break now, or do I have half an hour more?
Isidora, please, can you mute yourself?
All right. So let me show you. One of the things is I want to show you this. So in Google Colab on the left, you have some options over here, and one of the options is this files. If you have files option, you can actually it comes with some sample data, but you can actually add your own data. Right? So some of the sample data has this CSV. CSV stands for comma separated value. And if I click on any one of these, double click, it opens up the right inside it. It opens up this type of tabular data. Right? You can see it has column header. All of these are columns, right? So longitude, latitude, ordinary, median age, total room, total bedroom, and so on. And then there are rows. Right? So there are lots of rows, over 3,000 rows, and quite a few columns. Right? And you can keep scrolling. So I'm going to page 2, page 3, page 4, and so on. Right? So lots of pages here. Right? You can use more pages. Right? So lots of data. And the idea is with data like this, you can visualize it, right? You can manipulate the data, clean up the data, and put it on plot some charts and things like that, right? So now we could use something like this, right? But in order to learn and learn the concept of data cleanup and data visualization, let's use a much simpler data set. Okay, so I'm going to show you a data set that I created for this purpose, and it's about football. So should be interesting and something that uh, everyone can hopefully identify with. I'm going to drag this here. I'm also going to share it. Chat.
Excuse me, I will ask everyone to mute
How do I share this?
themselves. Urunova also needs to mute
Okay, and
yourself,
I'll,
please.
Bakshish, I'll share it with you, and then you can see if you can share it with everyone else. Okay.
Sorry?
So I'm sharing the CSV file. I don't know how to share it.
CSV file.
So
Oh,
now I double click on this.
do you have it on a drive link? We can directly share the drive link.
Yeah, I don't. I'll get it.
Or
Okay, so I
maybe
double
quickly you
click.
could upload it on a Google Drive and then copy paste the link of that Google Drive link here.
Okay.
Oof.
I should be there. Copy that.
И фамилия честь Лабус, да? Да. О чем вы меня тут вычеркнули? Вот.
Это Бухучет Навис Баренхадзе.
Ну, Бухучет, это мой Лабус.
By the way, do I have half an hour more for this session?
Потому что два раза вот.
Это ну-ка сейчас Бухучет.
Bakshish?
Yes, yes. You want half? Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can go ahead till. I also have a data set. I think I can go ahead from 5 onwards, 5 o'clock onwards, and you can do it at 5.
No, but I'm explaining Anderson, right?
Конференция.
Anyway, I will share that file.
Нет, я
So now let me just proceed.
на камере.
Okay, so let's look at this. Let's look at this data set, right? So it has information about the name of the player, right? So we've got some players you can recognize. Maybe. We've got the position, right? So we've got forward, midfielder, and then we've got some goals, assists, the team that they're on, minutes played, date of birth, height, weight, and nationality. Right? And one of the things you can see is
Все три, да?
is that
Ребята,
goals, for example, there's no information here. There's no information here, right? They're all empty. Minutes played, we have some null values over here. Right? And so this is what happens when you're dealing with data sets. You get some and the problem is that when you complete data, it kind of skews. Skews means it doesn't reflect properly on the charts and on the charts that you're working with. So you have to. One of the things you have to do is you have to clean up the data, and once the data is clean enough, then you can actually do things with it, right? So we're going to see some techniques, basic techniques of data cleaning. Okay, so I've got my session there, and so the first thing I'm going to do is let me put this here, close that. Okay. So the first thing is we're going to, and I will share I'll share one of these notebooks with you with all of these explanations. So if you're not following, that's fine. Okay, so the first thing you need to do, remember I said these interpreters need to load a library from the outside using the import. Okay, so the same thing for this. There's a library called pandas, PANDAS, that you need to import. Right. Now, one of the things that's very common is when you import a library, every time you use the
Well,
library, you
come on.
use the entire thing, right? So you're going to use say pandas dot whatever,
Oh.
pandas dot, and it kind of gets a little too much to type in pandas every single time, right? So Python allows you to give it like a nickname, right? Like an alias, okay? And you specify that using as. So when you say import pandas as PD, what you're saying is import the pandas library, but I'm going to refer to it as PD all the time, right? So so if you do that now, and if you run that, it imports, all it's doing is it's importing the pandas. Right? So now it knows a lot of stuff about pandas as well. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is we want to load this into what is called a data frame. Okay, so data frame is, think of a data frame as a spreadsheet, right? A tabular data. We saw those tables, right? Rows and columns and all that. So that is called data frame, and you can call it DF for short, right? So we call it DF, that means data frame. Okay, so DF is equal to PD. Okay, PD is again pandas, right? Dot read underscore CSV. Now, will you have to memorize that? If you use it often enough, you'll remember it for sure. And I will send you a notebook. I'll send you a notebook that has all of these things, right? So you have to take notes. If you try and follow along, and if you can, then good. Otherwise, you can just watch. Okay? So the next thing now is I need the name of this file. Okay, and the name of this file now is football.csv, is in the same folder as the Jupyter node. Right? So that's very important. And so you give it the name football.csv. Okay, and then if I run that, it takes a while and it's loaded. So now I have the data frame that is loaded, and now I can actually study this data set. Okay, but from Python's perspective. Okay, so now there are some functions which you'll have to learn, right? Learn and again I'll provide a reference so you don't have to remember all of these. One of these dot functions, remember we learned dot functions, you're going to learn a lot of dot functions, is info, right? So df.info means give me the information about the data frame, okay? And look at that, it gives me lots of it. So it tells me the class type, which is a data frame. It tells me the range, how big it is. So there are 38 entries. 38 entries means there are 38 rows. And then 0 to 37. That's the index, right? 0. Number Python starts counting from 0, right? And then it gives me the data column. So there are 10 columns. Right?
Isidora,
And
please,
it tells me all
can
the
you
10
please
rows. So again, they're
yourself?
counting from 0, right? So 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 9. And it tells me the name of the column. It tells me how many non-null columns are there. What does that mean? Remember when we saw the CSV file, let me open that again. When we saw the CSV file, remember we had some empty values here. So this one is empty, this one is empty, these two are empty, and so on, right? So this tells you how many of them are non-empty. So 38 means 38 out of 38 means all of the rows have names. All of the rows have position. Only 36 of the 38 rows have goals. And if you look back here at goals, two of them, these two, don't have any goals in there, right? So those are empty values, okay? And so on, right? So there's assists, 36, 38, 35 means quite a few have this as empty, non-null, as null. And so on, right? So it gives you a list of all the non-null count. And then it tells you what is called the data type, right? And in most cases, it just gives you, it just tries to infer data. And it says object of float 64, right? Float 64, you see float with the data. And think of object as a string for now. And you can see that name is recursive, function is midfield, what strings. Team is a string again. Minutes played is a number. Date of birth is an object. So this is interesting. It's taking the date of birth as an object, not as a date
tarafı gayi meri,
you can wait
tarafı
about
gayi
2
meri,
hours. And then
tarafı
nationality
kan bak
is
havalı
again
kardan bak anamcı bak
so
haşlı
it's
gibi.
kind of it's done pretty good
Havalı
job
o diyorsa,
with
portro kato
identify all
disole.
the now let's look at another dot function called head.
Tarafı
So
restoranı kan bak
df
havalı
dot
kayısından bak,
head.
amcı bak
And
portro
what this does
disole.
is it gives you the top 5
Ako
rows.
gosto ne to,
The ones
amcı
that
şu ya
pretty much
dukas
something
sekas
with
bak
you
çoğu raftan şu darbo ki
of
hamı
the data.
çiziyor
Right? So you can
kuvalı
actually
borç
see
data.
some of the data. Yeah. Just the top rows. And then now we can start processing these, right? So the very first thing we need to do is we got to handle the missing values, right? Whatever's missing, we got to treat them separately. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find out which values are missing. Okay, so and how we do that is so let's say find so another dot value, all of these are dot values. So we go df, everything is df, so data frame, right? Data frame.info, df.info, df.head, and now there's another one called df.is null. Okay, null is another word for empty, right? Void, empty, nothing. So is null. So we're checking to see everything that is null, right? And basically, I just want the, so if you run that, okay, you get quite a lot of data here, and it's basically all booleans, right? So if it's null, then it's a true, right? So this one is a true, this one is a true, this one is a true, and so on, right? So it's giving you false and true, and this doesn't really help, right? What we care about here it's just giving me a lot of trues and falses, right? So if I put dot sum, okay, and if I run that, okay, now I get something that's more useful, right? So name has 0 null values, position has 0 null values, goals has 2 null values, assists have 2 null values, and so on, right? Minutes played, date of birth, and so on. So you can see that all of the ones that have null values are the columns that we need to deal with, okay? So let's start with the first one. Like goals is the first one that has 2 null values. So let's look at that, right? So how do I, if I wanted to see only the count of goals that have null values, I would do this, right? So df, we've seen that already, and we've already done. Let me do this whole thing again. So we've already seen this entire thing, but I don't want to see all of the columns. I only want to see, I want to filter by goals. I only care about goals. Okay. So if I go back into df, just after df, and I put this square brackets, remember we used this when we wanted to say only give me the first item of the list or the second item of the list, right? Here we can actually pass it a string and put in goals over there. So this is now saying, we are saying, give me only goals from the list. Okay, and if you run that, okay, it gives me 2. So it's only giving me this 2, right? Not everything else. Okay. So now the question is, we've got 2 values of 2 rows in goals that have no values. So what would be a good way to fill that up, right? We've got to give it some value. And what should we give it, right? So generally, like in these kinds of data sets, like for goals, if there's nothing there, it means that there are 0 goals, right? That player hasn't scored any goals, okay? So what I want to do is I want to fill those, the ones where there's nothing, there's ones that there are blanks, I want to fill that with zeros. I want to replace them with zeros. So how do you do that? Okay, so you say df goals, right? So I'm only referring to the goals column, and from
Gerson,
there,
we are not able to see your.
NA is short for not available. So if the value is not available, let's go to the CSV file again and look at the data here. So goals here, right? So when it gets to this guy here, the value is not available, right? So that's NA. So we want to fill the NA, we want to fill that whatever's not available with what? With 0. We want to fill it with 0, right? And this function here This is a function, right? It's a dot function. It returns back, it throws back some value, which is a brand new DF goals, right? So if I run that now, you can see that it gives me all of the information, and I think it was 21, 22, right? So both of these are now filled with zeros, right? But if I look at the original again, right? I still see goals as 2. So what's going on over there, right? I just filled them with 0. I even proved that they're 0. But then when I run this again, I'm still getting 2. The reason why is because it's throwing back the results. It's not actually updating it, right? So what I want to do is I want to save it as a variable, but the variable is actually that column itself. So I'm overwriting that column, whatever that column is. I want to override that column with the with zeros. Okay, so you kind of have to do this thing over here, this step over here. So now when I run that, you can see that it processes all of that, right? And now I'm not showing anything. But now if I run this, now you can see that goals is now 0. Okay, so all of the zeros are filled up. So now we got to do the same thing with assists, right? Same thing with assists. So I'm going to copy that over there. I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to see that, oh, I got to change it to assists. Okay, and I want to see that it also has 2. We already know that. So let me copy that. It's the same thing, assists. If the assist is empty, then it means that we need to fill it with a 0, right? So we do that. And now if I run that now again, you'll see that assist is going to come down from 2 to 0, okay, which is what we want. There we go. Assist is also 0, right? So that's how we do that. Now we're going to deal with let's deal with height. Okay, let's deal with height. And so we look at height, okay, and we can see that there are 2. We already know that. So what would make a good sense, or what would be a good way of filling the height column, right? Would it be 0? Think about it, right? If 0 is empty, right? We've got some data here where there's no height, right? Height, there's that here. So this guy, Paolo, right? His height is not mentioned. We don't know the height, right? So what should we do, right? We could put a 0, but that doesn't make sense. It's like saying he's 0 feet tall or 0 centimeters tall or whatever. That doesn't make sense. It cannot be 0, right? So what do we do? One option is you could drop this whole row. You could delete this whole row and say, like, let's just delete the row because we don't know what the height is, and the height is important for some of the data visualizations that we're doing, right? But a better thing to do would be to find the median, right? So there are 2 things. There's mean and there's median. I won't get too much into statistics, but basically the difference is one. Uh, the median is good if there are really tall players and really short players, right? If the range is a lot more, then you would use median. And if the range was not so much, so for example, weight, right? Most of the footballers, most of these football players, they kind of weigh the same thing. You're not going to get really skinny people, right? Because you kind of need to be fit, and you cannot get really overweight people. Again, you need to be fit, right? So we're talking about international playing over here, right? So for height, because you could have really tall people and really short people play football. For height, it makes sense to use median, and for weight, it makes sense to use mean, right? But they're very, very similar. Both of these are really similar. So you could use them interchangeably for the most part, right? So the first thing you need to do, you cannot fill it with 0. So the first thing you need to do is you want to calculate what the median is. It's kind of like the average, right? Take the tallest person, take the shortest person, and you take the average of that, right? So, Pandas has a built-in way of calculating that. All you have to do is say df, for data frame, height, because we're dealing with the height column, dot, and then just put median. Okay, that's it. So if I run that now, it gives me the median. So the median is 180 centimeters. So let's see what that looks like with the data here. Height, so you can see there's 177, 91, right? So 91, this guy is really tall. And it goes down to whatever, 148 maybe, 203, we got 203. But kind of like the average, but the median is about 180. Okay, so we could say that the two guys who we don't know what their ages are, if we set their age to be 180.5, it's not going to skew the data that much, right? It's not going to affect the visualizations that we do. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to put this, we're going to catch the median and we're going to save it into median of height as a variable, right? And then we're going to replace, okay, so df height dot fill NA, so fill not available with the median height. Okay. Fill it with the median height. And if I run that now, it's going to give me all of the updated stuff. And if there was a 0, you can see there are no empty values here, right? But it's not really making the update. It's just giving you the data, right? So what I want to do is I want to replace the df of height with this calculated median, with this new stuff here. Right? Now, if I run that, okay, it says okay, done. And now if I run this again here, this missing values, you can see that height now is going to go down to 0. Okay. Okay, there you go, down to 0. Okay, same thing with the weight, except for the weight, median weight equals, okay, we're going to go with mean. Okay, and the reason why, and you could use median, again, it's not wrong there, but the benefit here, the thing here is like the range of weights is not going to be too much, right? They're more or less going to be the same weight. Let's look at that and see. I'm just predicting that, but so 72. So you can see they're all within like, so this guy is really light, 52, 50. Actually, no, these are intentionally put there and we'll get to that in a minute. But most of them are like, 75, 80, something within that range. Okay. So, so we have the mean, and then the same thing, we go df weight fill not available, only fill the not available with the actually not mean weight, right? Mean weight, right? And then this is only going to give us the data. It's not going to actually update the values. If you want to update the values, you have to say, okay, so now we've updated the weight. And now if I run this again, now you're going to see that weight is also going to go down to 0. Okay, so it's down to 0. Okay, so we've handled the weight. Okay, so now let's look at we've got date of birth. We've got 3 missing for date of birth, right? And name, we don't have anything missing. All the names are there. So date of birth, we've got like 3 missing. So if date of birth is missing, we can decide what we want to do with it, and we could either ignore it if any of our plots don't need the date of birth, then we can just ignore it. Or if it does need date of birth, then we have to remove it. Okay? So let's say for sake of argument, we need to remove date of birth, right? How do we do that, right? So the first thing we need to do is df again, and there's another function now called drop NA. Okay, drop NA means drop everything that's not available. Okay, but we don't want to drop everything. We want to drop all the columns that are not available. We only want a subset of that. And so you see here, I'm using the positional argument. Remember, I did that positional argument. And so this takes in a list of strings, which is the column names of whatever you want to drop, right? So what we're saying is that if the date of birth column is empty, right? If it's not available, right? Only the date of birth column, then I want you to remove the entire row. Just delete the entire row, right? I don't want the entire row. And again, this is, if I run that, it's going to give me back another data frame, but it's not going to update the existing one. So if I run this now, it's still going to say 3, date of birth is 3, right? So I have to replace the data frame, the entire data frame, with the one where date of birth is dropped only if the value is not available. Okay? So if I run that now, nothing there, but now if I run this here, you can see that date of birth is now 0, right? So there's 0 counts over there. And you can do the same thing with minutes played, right? So minutes played also, I would say, if it's not available, then just drop it, right? And you can actually put them both in a comma separated list. Okay? So if I run that again, okay, runs fine, and then okay, so now they're all 0, which means that all of the data, right? All of the data has values. There are no nulls at all. All right. Cool. 9 minutes. So next step is the way I see it is we've got about 5 or 6 minutes. We're going to take a break, short break, right? We're going to come back, and then we have the last session for the day. So for that session, I'm going to finish going through the data cleanup and then visualizations. So I'm going to take about maybe half an hour something. And then for the last part of the session, I'm going to hand it over to Bakshish. And he is going to talk about something about, like, now that we know we've gone through the entire process of data cleanup and visualizations, what can we do next, right? What can we do with all of this? Like, where do we go from here? And a lot of that has to do with machine learning and things like that, right? And then I think he's also going to take a real data set. So this data set here is a very simple data set. It has very few rows, and it's meant only for explaining the concepts. He's going to take a real data set with lots and lots and lots of real data and take us through the entire process of cleaning up the data and all. Yep. So that's the plan. Yeah. Should we take a break now and come back in like 5 or 10 minutes?
Yes, I think it's better we have a break and then we come back in, 10 minutes. Okay?
10 minutes? Okay.
10 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.